thank you everybody for your patience and for joining us here. I, from my own perspective, just see a video of me, so I'm going to assume that it's a room full of happy people who are excited to learn about freelancing, whether or not they wanted to be a freelancer or not. So we're gonna start out with just a couple of minutes introducing each of our presenters. And I have no idea what order they're sitting in. So I'm going to go alphabetical order by last name, and we're going to start with Margot Carpenter.
Hi, everybody.
Tell us about how you got here.
So I know a lot of people here, but my name is Margot Carpenter. I've been living and working from Maine for close to 30 years now. And my cartographic roots are in environmental design, which is another name for architecture. It's not, my background is not geography. It's not the most common, but it's not an uncommon route to cartography. My passion is design, spatial design, so I thrive in that environment. And from architecture, I moved to landscape architecture and then picked up a certificate in GIS. And I started my own business called Hartdale Maps, which we could get into a whole side topic about naming a business, but we're not doing that right now. When I started out, I did not have, I had a very small portfolio. So what I did is, I live in a very small town called Belfast, Maine, and yep, he's pulling up my website. We needed a bicycle map and a trails map, so I made them and started selling them, and versions of them are still for sale. And those became the building blocks for my portfolio. I also sent out letters of introduction to books, hiking guides, because that is sort of my niche. Recreation mapping has always been my little happy space. And a few months later, I got a call from Falcon Press, and I had forgotten that I had sent a letter to them, but I said, who? And I ended up doing years of mapping their Falcon Press guides, the best easy day hikes to, there's a number of places. They have a very strict template, which also helped me structure how I do an Illustrator file. That was the start. Since then, I started reaching out. Over time, my strengths are certainly our design, but my weakness is business. But I ended up collaborating. I subcontract with Stephen Engel with now called Community GIS, and his strengths are business, and so it's a good collaboration. It works well for me. He handles all the clients and the financial side, and I get to do the mapping. So collaborating is a key part, I think, of doing independent work. So that's me. Who's next? We can go alphabetically.
All right, so Erin Greb would be next in alphabetic order by last name.
All right, so hello, I'm Erin Greb, and yeah, with naming businesses, my business name, Erin Greb Cartography. Sometimes you just gotta go simple, and so my path was, I started out at Penn State as an art major. My intention was to do graphic design, and then I switched into the geography department my junior year. And so that art, background was really great for doing like layout and color theory, which blended well with Cindy Brewer's classes. And then, after that, I went to CU Boulder for grad school. My first job was at MapQuest when they still had a publishing division. I did, history textbooks, phone book directory maps, remember those? Road atlases. So I was there for 2 years and then moved back to State College and worked for the Penn State Geography Department on my own. I was the only cartographer doing campus maps. I worked, Penn State Press would contact the geography department. And so at that time, I really learned how to do estimates, billing, in addition to the cartography work. So I think that job really did prepare me for becoming a freelancer, which it was, after those 2 years, I did freelance starting out after my daughter was born. So, a lot of people will do freelance in addition to their job, and then gradually go into it. For me, it was that, I had a kid. I wanted to kind of, work a little bit. It was supplementary income, so I had that advantage of having a partner at the time that I didn't have to support myself completely. But that was 18 years ago. And so over time, I was able to develop my career in a way that I can fully support myself 100% freelance. The jobs that I do, it is print publication. Half of it tends to be recreational mapping, either books or fold-out hiking maps, and then the other half is academic publishing, doing small maps for lots of history professors that are writing books for their research that are very customized maps. And the way that I got my name out there, this ages me a little bit, but I actually I created a trifold brochure and mailed it to university presses, the art directors, the acquisition editors, and just said, here I am. And out of 100, I got 5 responses, and they're all still my clients like 15 years later. So now it's mostly word of mouth now through the presses that I work with. They'll have an author come in and they'll give my name to them, and then that author will publish with a different press. And so I'm lucky that word of mouth tends to be working well now. But I sometimes ask myself, how would I put myself out there now in more of a digital world compared to my original brochure?
I still think paper, sending someone a letter is just, they have it in hand. I think it's great.
Yeah, so that's me.
That's very memorable, I think, to have a physical object. All right, next up will be Rick Litterer Barnes.
Okay, that would be me. So, hi, Rick Litterer Barnes, Upstate GIS, Upstate being upstate New York. I gave a talk here at NACIS in Tacoma in 2019 that sort of outlines how I started my business, but I'll give a really brief recap for those that weren't here for that. So I came to this sort of in a non-traditional way. My undergrad and grad school degrees are in geology, and I went from that to environmental consulting, did some mapping for that business, decided I liked the mapping way more than the environmental stuff. So I ended up working at a community planning firm for 7 years, doing their mapping, and also by default becoming a planner because it was a small operation. And then in April of 2012, the planning had become most of my job, and I wasn't doing much mapping, so I decided that it was time to switch. And a whole bunch of circumstances all coming together at the same time made that a good timing to do that. So I started my own business, Upstate GIS, out of my home office, and I started off, doing mapping for my old boss, the old planning firm, and then gradually added more and more clients. A lot of my clients are in the planning field. I have a good sort of pairing with an independent planner. She does all the planning work. I do the mapping work. So that's probably, a third to half of my work. But then I also work a lot with land trusts. That map that Daniel's scrolling by is one of my land trust maps. I've got about a dozen land trusts I work with. I do a lot of their prioritization analyses for land acquisitions, things like that. If you saw my talk at NACIS last year, I've also been working on the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas. So that's a little bit different than I try to focus on open space, conservation, agriculture protection, things like that. But I do understand zoning, having been a planner. So I got into that as well. So, it's for me, it is some partnerships. I subcontract with the planners, as I said. And then, back in 2019, I think I said that maybe 20% of my work was direct. Now probably 60 to 70% of my work is direct and the rest is subcontract. And starting out, I had the luxury of a spouse that had health insurance and a full-time job, and so it wasn't that scary to sort of take that leap. But now, I probably couldn't support our entire family just by myself. But it's to the point now that we're comfortable with both of us working, and if I need to take some time off, I can. Not a big deal. But the business has grown quite a bit over time, and then we can talk about various ways that that's happened later.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And then our last panelist is David Nuttall.
Good afternoon. There are 2 empty seats up here if anyone's standing and really wants to run for them. Okay, so as the British guy on the panel, I should explain the origin of the word freelance.
We know it. I know it.
Literally a free sword, as in not belonging to or beholden to a lord or an owner. So we are free to fight for our own selves with broadswords. So freelance is literal. So allegedly an unconventional way of getting here. So I'm going to start even more unconventional. I've been drawing maps since I was 5. Wasn't paid till I was 16. So I've been a professional cartographer working for the British government and then various companies. And I started my own LLC in 2006 with the intent of quitting my job. And so we'll get into structure later, but I became an LLC straight away with good advice, and I actually am an S corporation. So just to get you thinking about what is your legal structure, I'm more complicated because I'm an umbrella organization with multiple divisions, mostly of myself, because I'm an artist, so I do hand-drawn maps. A lot of those are commissioned, so that's a customer versus something I'm doing and trying to sell. I'm also a consultant for 911 work. I'm also a consultant for the establishment I work at, which is an old cotton mill, so I do maps of their buildings as well. And I have various ad hoc customers. So I'm unusual, and to give you a bit more, I don't have a traditional degree. So I don't come from academia at all. So I've been intimidated in certain scenarios because, well, am I qualified for this? Does my 50 years experience really count? So that, I'll give you the brief, but yeah, I'm even more of an anomaly because I'm a bit of weird everything. And right now, 50% of my time is contract work to one customer, which is what I talked about yesterday. And thank you, Daniel, for scrolling my products, which are available online in my store. We've lost Daniel. He's got a hat.
All right. Well, thank you for that too. Also, the audio started on my end to break up just a little bit when you were speaking. Hopefully that passes. But in the meanwhile, I'll also mention that I am also a freelancer. I'm here moderating, guiding questions and things. But I'm also sort of a half panelist myself in that I operate as a freelancer. I do a lot of monochrome work for various book clients, a lot of small academic press books, that are just a 5 by 7 inch page. They're only going to print 200 copies of this sort of thing. They just need a quick monochrome piece. So I do a lot of those for clients, as well as some magazine work on occasion for Scientific American, but I'm very focused on print cartography. That was, when I was getting my degree in cartography from the University of Wisconsin, all the other grad students and peers of mine were all excited about the, coding maps in Flash back in 2003 and 2004, starting to learn JavaScript a little bit after that. But I liked to do print things, so I kind of stuck with that. All right, so that's a little bit about each of us, and mostly what we're going to be doing for our time here is having a chat in front of all of you in response to your questions and things you're curious about. But to begin with, to get the conversation started, I do have some questions ready and seated to go to ask of our panel. So I'm going to put out there a little bit of a connection that I was thinking about a couple of weeks ago when I saw that there would be a panel on cartographic ethics. And obviously, because I'm, I unfortunately, for those of you who are wondering why I'm on video here, I tested positive for COVID just as I arrived in the Pacific Northwest, unfortunately, so haven't been able to go to any of the NACIS presentations, so I missed out the ethics one. But I was thinking about how ethics might intersect with freelancing, because a lot of the discussion around cartographic ethics is focused on doing right by our readers, making sure that we're putting information out there that is not misleading, that is accessible and easy to understand. It's very focused on the relationship between the person making the thing and the person consuming it. But I'm also interested in thinking about the ethics that go into the relationship between the person making the thing and the person paying for it. Because we operate in a space where maybe clients can't necessarily judge if they're being treated fairly. For example, if you think about other professions where maybe you hire somebody who knows a lot and you don't about that subject, like an auto mechanic. Can you tell that that mechanic is being fair to you in their prices? Are they, fixing things that needed to be fixed, or were they actually fine? And so I'm wondering about, if any of you have thoughts about the ways that we could apply the concepts of developing an ethical framework to the interactions between the people who hire us and the people who make the maps for them. And if there was something about this that came up in the ethics panel and you were there, please feel free to also repeat it for those of us who weren't there. So any of you want to run with that a little bit?
I'll jump in then. Everyone's looking around.
I can that too.
So, first thing is, I'm clearly wearing the name of my company on my shirt. So am I selling you? Am I just branded? So there is an interaction of how much pressure is there on someone as well from just a physical branding point of view. So also I get to show you my name. So is that ethical? I think there's two aspects that Daniel touched on, I think of. One is price that you charge and price that you pay yourself. And ethical being, if I track the hours for some of my projects, I'm not being fair to myself. So by extension, I've not been fair to the customer because I've completely given them a bad impression of what the value is. So by undercharging, that's also unethical in a way because I've probably then undercut colleagues. Not intentionally, I'm not going for the lowest price, so you can't compete on lowballing everyone else. But ethics is both ways, making sure you're being true to yourself as well as the customer. And I think the other part that made me think of that is being transparent. Explaining what the process is. Someone comes to me and says, can you hand draw a map? They might think it takes 10 minutes. It was 3 months work. So how do you set the expectation? How do you bridge that gap of lack of education of your client? Educating your client is a huge part of being freelance because they do not have a clue, for the most part. No names.
I think as a contract, it comes down to how you're communicating with the client and what kind of contract. And I have to say, sometimes I've got very formal contracts and sometimes I have nothing. And really, it's an email exchange, which is also a responsibility. So what's written in an email, I can hold them to that. And so it does kind of span a little bit what it is, and part of it is the project. If I'm doing it for my neighbor, I'll just, and they offer to pay me, I'm not going to do much of a contract. But if it's a large, extended project with many cooks in the kitchen, limit how many reviews are in there, and be very clear about what's going to be charged and how much time I expect to put into it. So I think that kind of transparency is really important, and being upfront about and limiting with a contract. And to just do the best I can on that. But anyway, Erin?
Yeah, I guess in line with like pricing and being honest with the client. We were talking earlier about how I work a lot in academia where they might have grant money that's going to run out, and they'll say to me, "Oh well, the money's going to disappear in a month, and so just take all the money and run with it." And I, sometimes I feel a little like. What would the person that gave you that grant money think about that? And so I'll say, well, maybe, this is how much I would actually charge. Perhaps if you have a research project next year, you could have a credit, and, I'll do a map for you next year, because it does kind of feel like, working in that world, I don't want to take advantage of a system. And then there are the other times where, somebody does, expect you to do something very quickly, and might get offended if you say, well, I can't work on it for 3 months, and they'll, it's like having to communicate with somebody that yes, it's a simple map. However, there are 20 people in front of you in line. And I mean, I don't know if this is an ethical discussion, but, I think I'm talking more about like honesty and communication. And yeah, communication is a huge part of freelancing, I have discovered, especially like, for people that don't understand, you'll get the email that says, I've never worked with a cartographer before, just tell me how this works. And so you really do have to think about like, how do I respect this client? How do I tell them, a clear process? And at the end, it is word of mouth for me for the most part. So I want them to walk away thinking, this is an honest cartographer. I had a good experience with them. And taking advantage of people, and that wouldn't make me feel good in the end.
I guess I'll just add, sort of on the billing front. For me, one of the ethics that I run into sometimes is, I said it was going to take, it's usually an estimate. It's going to take X number of hours for this project or whatever it is. But sometimes, I'll get into the weeds, which makes it take longer, or, there'll be software problems, or I forgot to save my edits, and 2 hours later my computer crashed and I have to start over. So
That never happens.
Yeah, no, never. The autosave on Arc Pro is great, but it doesn't autosave edits for those that use Arc Pro. So anyway, so for me, being true to my word to the client, if I said it was going to take 10 hours and it took 20 because of things that, I did not anticipate well, or I had problems, I'm not going to build in 20 hours. I'm going to build in the 10 hours. If it took, 15 hours because I did what I said I was going to do, and they said, well, can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? And I change it and I change it and I change it. Then I'm going to build them to 15 hours, even though I said it would take 10 because they've asked for more things. So, but also, being true to yourself, and making sure you're getting paid. If I said it was going to take 10 hours and, it took me 3 because I wrote a script that, made it go faster, well, I did spend, 30 hours figuring out how to do that, in the last 3 projects. So I'm still going to build the client, more than 3 hours. Maybe I won't build them 10 now because, I'll split the difference, that sort of thing. So that's why fixed fee projects can be great. But they can also bite you, because if you do a fixed fee project thinking it'll take you 20 hours and then you spend 40, too bad, so sad for you.
The other component of ethics that I can think of is the document that you're handing over to the client. Sometimes they get a JPEG, and I have personal problems with PDFs and how they render contours, and people take screenshots and then the contour lines are all exploded. Anyway, so I always deal with a raster. I export to TIFF and then JPEG and give it to a client. That's all they get. And they can do whatever they want with it. And some clients, I will give them the whole Illustrator file and say, have fun with it, it's yours. And that works out. If they have some Illustrator capability, then that works out well for me because they can do their own updates, and that works. Other files, I'm protecting them and I hold the copyright. And so it really is but that's the other side of ethics.
Copyright, that's a whole conversation.
I don't know if you're probably going to jump into this, but I have just started learning from another friend who's a graphic designer about upcharging for exclusive rights. That was not something I knew about when I first pitched to my very first client. She told me I was very much underpitching for them, and she mentioned we can upcharge anywhere from like 100% to 200% of your final estimation.
Can I jump in on this one as an artist?
Yeah.
Before I answer that, don't let me forget, just by show of hands, because Daniel can't see the room, who is already a freelance cartographer? Who wants to be? Who's here because they're in the wrong room? Okay. Good. So the others that didn't put your hands up, you're just curious or you just
So
you
that
like
was
us?
about 2/3 already
So-
in freelance, and about 1/3 wanting to be.
Okay, so to the question. What was the question?
Copyright exclusive
So,
rights.
if you consider your work art, as an artist, you own the copyright forever. You never sell the copyright. If you sell the copyright, you are legally banned from creating that same thing again. Substantially different is the legal language in copyright. So if you substantially alter it, it's technically a different copyright. You don't have to file copyright. If you sign the thing, you have copyright of it for 99 years. So you don't have to trademark it. Now, selling exclusive rights, you're not selling the copyright because you want the ability to create that same style map for someone else or that same style of artwork for someone else. But you can put in a contract, you won't reproduce theirs, you won't sell theirs for profit, and therefore you can't make any more money off it. So yes, you should upcharge for exclusivity of use. So it's really a use contract, never give away your copyright. Never have that discussion. If someone comes to you because they don't know, go read about copyright and give them a legal blurb that says, sorry, I can't do that because you're preventing me doing my job for anyone else. And most people go, oh, I didn't realize that, sorry. And then you negotiate what your rates are.
I didn't realize there was a difference between.
And I have a different experience. I mean,
Please.
Most of the university presses that I work for require my work to be a work for hire contract. So,
Yes, who paid you to do it? And did you use their equipment?
I mean, I wouldn't have work if I did, like, you know, most of these presses wouldn't even hire me if I said I'm going to but most of the times now it's not the press, it's the author that contacts me directly. A lot of the university presses I work with are, you know, requiring their authors to hire their own index or their own copy editor. And so I am getting hired by the author, and then so I just, you know, most of them will say, okay, so once they pay, they have the map, so it's not the copyright of the book, it's the copyright of the author. I mean, this is something that I struggle with, honestly, because you know, I don't give the full Illustrator file.
I've only done it a couple times, but it has helped me out.
And if, you know, if they require changes, I say I want to make the changes. I don't want to give the file to the author or to the press because, you know, because I don't want my name to be on it and then have them make changes to it later. So I at least hold that, you know, I will tell them, like, please, 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 you know, write to me if there's even just a last minute change right before you print the book. Ask me and I will change it if my name is attached to it. You know, I might not be a copyright in the front of the book, but there will be a credit, or there will be an acknowledgement in the acknowledgement sections of the book. You know, so I hear people say, like, don't ever do that, but I think in some worlds that is the reality, that it is a work for hire agreement.
Yeah, and there is a context. So if you work for a big company, use their equipment, their time to create it, they own it. So when freelance, you've got to separate. You've got to get decompartmentalized and actually separate things into chunks. And we should talk about bank accounts at some point. Never use one bank account. There. That's the bank account.
And I'll say that my experience has been similar to Erin's in that, you know, it's sort of, for some people, it's just, well, if you want to do business with us, this is what you got to sign. This is what we do for everybody, and so you can choose to not work with them, but they're gonna want the copyright when you're done. I just had a client that I had to have so we had a whole negotiation about that, and eventually they wouldn't back down, and I decided, fine, I will work. I do want to work with them enough that I'm willing to surrender that. But we also had a discussion that with copyright, one of the things in the United States too is that I think it's one of the only countries in the world where when you turn over copyright, you also surrender authorship. So you are no longer like my client, once the map is done, they can say, map by us. Nobody helped us at all. We totally did this ourselves. Just because they own the copyright now, and they can erase my name and deny that I ever worked on it. And we worked some contract language in there to make sure that wouldn't happen. But you know, that is, it's either that or just, you know, not work and not get paid.
Contract. Sadly, contract attorneys might be your friend at some point.
Yeah, definitely. So this is all great to see this conversation flowing really well. I do want to work the audience, and there are questions in just a second, but I will put a cap on this a little bit about ethics and say, you know, one thing comes to mind that ties some of this together too is it'd be great, I think, if there were just some sort of document that maybe some freelancers work together to produce that's basically like, here's what to expect when hiring a freelancer. Like, this is what you should be prepared to answer. This is what they should be asking you. Just setting expectations for that meeting so that if you're if you're hiring a freelancer, what to expect, and you can get a sense that they seem to be treating you fairly, and also how to treat them fairly. So maybe that's something that people can start to brainstorm as we move forward, either in this session or outside of it, because I think that'd be pretty valuable. So I do want to bring in audience questions, and so there are a couple of ways that we could do this that I had in mind. There's the traditional people raise their hands and get called on. I can't see any of you, so if we want to go with any of that, I'll leave that to folks in the room to do the calling. But also, I think, in addition to that, for those of you who are on Slack and are on Slack on your phones and laptops and such right now, if you want to send questions to me, either by DM or if you want to post it in the NACIS 2024 panels, the Slack channel for this room, I can also see about, like, are there questions that multiple people are interested in asking at once, so we can make sure to prioritize things that multiple people are interested in. So while those of you start typing who have questions to share via Slack, for those of you who want to do the in-person raise your hand thing, let's go with one of those first. So I'll leave it to somebody on the panel to pick somebody live in the audience to ask a question.
Joe.
First of all, thank you for hosting this panel. Looking forward to all the questions that are going to be asked and kind of learning from all of you and your experience. My undergraduate degree is in history. Midway through it, I realized that I could do mapping as something I could actually make an income off of. I went into a master's program in cartography, and now I'm working full-time, but I'm looking to, throughout undergraduate and kind of later in graduate school, I did some on and off freelance work. Mostly some professors would come to me and say, hey, I know you're into history, can you make a map of this for me? And most of those connections just kind of came through word of mouth from people I knew personally in the department. But having since graduated and not having as close of connection to the university, and wanting to kind of continue, at least on the side, doing some of that historical cartography, how would you recommend someone who's kind of doesn't have those connections yet kind of get themselves out there and get those kind of first clients to get the ball rolling?
I would ask first if you have a portfolio.
Yes.
Okay, I would say, yeah, that's the number one thing, is build a portfolio, because if you share your information, they'll want to see what have you made. Let's see. So are you wondering, like, how to contact, who to contact? Yeah, I think that, like, in the beginning, I was a little, like, I was going all over the place with my clients, and then over time, I did narrow down my focus. But sometimes I think I should have narrowed it down first to really think about, like, who do I want my clients to be? So if you're interested in historical mapping, then, something like what I did, if you want to, like, kind of branch into academic publishing, just contacting the people that work for university presses and say, hey, if you're ever in need of somebody that does this, they're always looking for people, that might be able to do the, quicker jobs, and yeah, I guess, my first thing was just make sure you have a portfolio. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
So I would add to that, so that you have a portfolio, and I do believe in giving someone a product that they can have their hands in, but also have a website that demonstrates so that they can sneak a peek if they want to. And then go ahead and write letters, and history museums might be an obvious place to say letters of introduce yourself. Send some things and say, I'm skilled in this and I can do this, if you ever have a project or know of anybody that has a project. I'm not sure what kind of history you would like to map, but people are very interested in mapping their ancestry. I think if you wanted to dive into that, I think there would be a huge market. And so Ancestry.com, the genealogical libraries, put up a little flyer. But so build the portfolio, both digital and paper, to be able to send to people, and then identify your sources and develop those sources, those clients. Would be how I would approach it. And be creative. Ask your friends, who do you know would want a history map of some sort.
I would add to that too. Technically, and a sort of, in the most technical sense, we're all sort of competing in the marketplace, but really most of the work that we do is adding more clients into the marketplace. The number of people who need a cartographer and have no idea that they could hire a cartographer, right? There's a lot of opportunity out there, I think. I would just guess off the top of my head that most of the people who get hired to make maps are not cartographers. It's, I need something for my book. I found somebody who could do some tracing off Google Maps for me or something like that. And so I think that, there is a lot of just untapped potential out there. And when you go out and you talk to people about, hey, here's what I could do for you, you're also just creating more business for the field in general.
Yeah, adding on to what Daniel said, like the local, I live in a small town in Pennsylvania. There's a graphic design firm, and every time they get a request for a map, they call me. So if there's a graphic design firm, that you could contact and just say to them, hey, if you ever get, a request for a map, especially if it's historical, since you have that background, let them know, because they'll probably be very happy to get that off of their hands. Because I've had a lot of projects where a graphic designer started it, and then they thought it might take a couple hours, and then 20 hours into it they realize that they have no idea what they're doing. So I will sometimes get like half finished projects that I will finish for the end client. Some graphic design firms might not want to give away that work, but most of them are happy to give it to somebody that knows what they're doing more than they do.
So you've hit on one of the best things you can possibly do is repeat customer. Someone knows you, they trust you, they come to you before, they don't even shop around. So establishing that relationship. And there's a famous thing in the art world is, if you're not selling art, you're not finding your customers. Don't change what you're doing. Go find where they are. So if you're into history, go research. Go who's doing history maps. Look at them and go, I can do better than that. Or whatever your subject is. So.
Yeah, and not, for me, clients build clients. But, early on for me, I had, one client that, would recommend me to someone else, and I think that one client probably got me 6 or 7 other clients, who then got me other clients and got me other clients. So, if you can find that one good client that is happy with your work, will give you the repeat work, but then will also, knows other people that, need your services, that's really key.
Are there other questions?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Go to the back, and then we'll come to you.
I was wondering, do you vary your rates or fees at all based on who your clients are, like your neighbor versus like a huge company, for example? And if you do, how do you go about navigating that?
So yes and no. Because I've been in the business so long, my rates have changed over time. And some of my clients are grandfathered in at an earlier rate. My rate has gone up, and any new clients or clients that have disappeared for a long time and are all of a sudden saying we need this because a repeat client does happen, I'll let them know that I have a new rate. So in fact, yes, but I try to be very clear about it. It doesn't wiggle that much. The neighbor thing is, that is kind of an isolated situation. They're not. An informal client is different. So they do vary, but with on a program, on a schedule, kind of.
Mine wiggles a lot. But then I'm doing hand-drawn maps that I'm doing speculatively. I want to draw it and I'm going to sell prints of it. So the rate I charge for that is very different than you coming to me with a commission versus my hourly rate for a customer. And one of the things I'll say about rate is it's very hard to put them up. It's easy to take them down. So for example, if you want to charge an hourly rate, but your customer can't afford it, tell them what your hourly rate is. You can discount it for them. So you can give a special deal. If it's that one customer you want to get forever, say, my rate's this, and for this one map, I'll discount it. But you need to set the expectation that your rate is here, your value. There's a thing called perceived value. People will perceive you at this quality based on your rate. So don't undersell yourself, but you can discount for a friend. But still let them know you're getting a $400 an hour rate For 30. Will they respect you more or less? I don't know. And just so you guys know, beforehand we did discuss, are we comfortable discussing money, like actual numbers, and we kind of all landed somewhere on, it depends. Depends who we're talking about and what. So I think just for everyone, if you are embarrassed or intimidated by asking, well, how much is your hourly rate for this? I would be happy to talk to you about that afterwards. So I don't want to shy away from it. I just don't want anyone to feel on the spot.
Daniel, you could share the survey results to the audience if you wanted to.
Give him time to pull that up.
Yeah, I think the average rate this year was around $65 an hour. Yeah, when I think about rate, it's like you think about, for this particular client, is it going to be really easy? Like, is this a 2-hour, 3-hour project where they just need 5 places put on a black and white map? Like, I do have a minimum. So if I think it's going to only cost an hour, or take an hour, I also need to not think about that hour. I need to think about, my decades of experience and the software and my health insurance. It's like I do have a minimum cost that I have, even if it's higher than what my hourly rate might be in my head.
And the bookkeeping that is required to tally all that.
Yeah,
that's got to be baked into the price.
You're basically paying yourself to be every single person at a business.
Yes.
So if you are paying a business to do it, they're splitting that money across 6 people. You're all 6 people. So in theory, you should be paying yourself what you would pay someone else to do that. Bookkeeping, the accounting, whatever other work you're doing. You do your own marketing. So
Daniel, do you want to run through those numbers?
Sure. As far as the sort of, what we've asked in the survey in the past is we ask people what they earn on an hourly basis, whether or not they charge by the hour. Just look at how much time you spent mapping, how much money you got for that mapping, what does that typically work out to on a, across the year. And due to inflation, the amount freelancers have been earning has been declining a little bit. So inflation's been catching up with us, but the median respondent is at about $65 US dollars per hour. And again, we had worldwide participation in the survey. It's all converted to US dollars just for easy comparability. I will say too that, to go back to the original question, I definitely vary my hourly rate based on, how much I think money is worth to that person. It's because it's right. There's this tension here. Somebody says, how much should this cost? And you want to try and not leave money on the table that they would have been willing to pay, but you also don't want to overshoot where they potentially balk at this and decide to not talk to you anymore. And so it's based just on gut impressions. Like, I have had clients who are like, yeah, I'm somebody who says, well, I'm just starting out. I just finished graduate school and now I'm, trying to get my first tenure track professor job, and I have to pay for the figures for my book myself out of pocket. So I think, well, this person clearly doesn't have a lot of money. They're not going to pay a lot. They're probably just going to go without maps if they cost too much. And versus, I was contacted after a job like that. Shortly thereafter, I was contacted by somebody who said, yeah, we're looking to make luxury shopping brochures for the highest end stores in New York. And I thought, well, this person obviously values money very differently than the first person who talked to me, so I can charge them more.
I think
so. Sometimes it's getting impressions like that from your client to think about what is this object worth to them, because I'm willing to take as much as I think they'll possibly give me without kind of overshooting it. So this is kind of where freelancers are at, and I made this point too about these sort of dollar amounts, $65 an hour, the median. Just thinking about, especially for those in the audience who haven't freelanced yet, but you're thinking about it, this can sound like a real great amount of money. That's the equivalent of, if you're paid $65 an hour working for someone else full time, that's over $130,000 a year. but it's exactly towards some of the things that David was talking about is, you're also your own bookkeeper, you're also your own, office manager, and you have to, buy ink for your printer or all this other stuff. And that comes out of that number, as well as big expenses like health insurance that, your employer is not going to cover for you because you're the employer. And the self-employment taxes that one pays, and no retirement savings are going to be provided to you unless you cut it out of that number, and sick time, all these kind of things. So I think that's probably what leads to, in my experience, a lot of people, especially early on in their career, underestimating what they're worth, because they think, well, $165 an hour sounds like way too much money, but they don't think about all of how little of that they're going to take home, basically. Just a fraction of that, especially because you're not usually working full time. You're not getting paid for 40 hours a week. You might be working, doing other management things, but you're not getting paid by the client necessarily, on an hourly basis to do that. So you have to figure that in somehow and raise the rate that you're charging them during the time you actually are making maps.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to go on too long on one thing because we're running out of time.
No, yeah.
So there was another question from Kristen, unless you have something to add.
No, I just quickly, I will say I do have different rates for different types of clients. My land trust clients typically is a little bit less than a municipal client or something like that. It's not much less, but like Margot, I do have existing clients that I charge less than new clients, but I do raise the rates on the existing clients. I have been raising my rates almost annually now, partly from the survey, because I was way low at the beginning, and I've been raising, and I've been trying to keep up, with inflation or a little bit more so. So I've been raising my rates about $10 an hour for the last 5 or 6 years. So.
I think geography has a little bit to do with that. In Maine, if I overcharge, they're just not going to buy the map. So, and there is a little bit of what my customer will pay.
Right.
Yeah.
There was another.
I think too, this goes back to something I mentioned for those of you who saw my talk on the freelancer survey, that there is what the market will bear, and we don't have a lot of fixed costs that necessarily go into a per map. I'm willing to be paid a low amount per hour versus being paid nothing per hour and not doing work. So I usually am willing to be flexible and go to, maybe sometimes even, 20% of what I might normally charge per hour, just because if I'm not doing much else at the time, it's better than nothing.
Right. Sarah, did you have a question?
I'd rather go on a hike.
Kristen had a question.
Yeah.
Rather go on a hike.
So I have just been starting out on different freelance work, and I was just curious for negotiating contracts or instances of you have to finish the entire project and then you get paid, or things like that. Like, how common are those things? And I guess how do you navigate then those types of things?
I don't know if, this is just my own made up contract that I have, is that I'd say that 90% of the work I do goes into the first draft for a lot of projects I do. And so up front, I say, I am going to send the invoice 30 days after I send you the first draft. And then they have 30 days to pay that. And because when I first started out, I did have a project that they took forever to get revisions back to me. It was something like 8 months. And I didn't have that in writing, and so it took me 8 months to get paid for work that I had done, mostly in the beginning. So after that experience, now I get paid 30 days after that first draft, or 60 if they take the whole time to pay the invoice. But then they have all the time they need to go through the revisions, and so it protects me. And I know that there are some very long projects that do take a long time, and those, this kind of project I'm talking about is something that might be like a 2 or 3 day, thing to do, like a couple of maps for a book, that, I have a set price for. And if it is a more long-term project, then you do installments. If it's like a huge project, have something paid up front, 50%, and then at the end. So you kind of have to structure it differently depending on how big the project is. But yeah, for something like under $1,000 for a book project, I always ask for that before it's potentially finished to protect myself.
It depends who the client is. So, for example, as we got here, my phone gave me a reminder to go send an invoice. I send one client an invoice every Friday for that week's work. Others, it's when you finish. Some, if you're working for a local government or working for a government agency, they have rules and you can't deviate. One took 8 months to pay me. That's several $1,000s sitting around for 8 months. Others will pay instantly. And it never hurts to ask them, like, does this have to go through your finance department to get paid? And one of mine just came back and said, yes, if it's over $3,000. If you bill me $2,999, I can pay you on a credit card instantly, and they get reimbursed. It's like, well, I'm just going to always bill you when I hear $2,900. Never going over that, because it will take 6 months to get paid instantly. So that's back to the transparency. Doesn't hurt to ask. They may not tell you, but you never know unless they ask. So, yeah, depends on the entity that's writing the check.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, like for fixed fee contracts, I usually have it written that it's usually 50% after the first draft, like Erin was saying, and then 25% on the second draft, and then 20% or 25% on the final. A lot of my projects are hourly, and so I set it up monthly billing. Whether I spent 5 hours this month or 50 hours this month, I'm going to send them a bill at the end of the month. I expect it. I write into the contract either 30 days or 45 days. But it is important to have the contract, especially if you're subcontracting, because having that expectation up front is important, because I've run into problems where I've subcontracted, I send them the bill, and crickets, and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting, and they're like, oh yeah, we're on a pay when paid system, so our client hasn't paid us, so we're not paying you. So that's something to make sure you know ahead of time. And sometimes you're just going to have to accept that if it's a project you really want to work on or need to work on. But for those types of projects, I've tried to get the contracts language specific. When I pay you, I expect to be paid within 45 days, regardless of when you get paid. So.
And I don't really, the only thing I have to add, pages out of both these books for me, but, and this is a side note, is in the contract, I would limit the number of revisions that are permitted.
Yes.
Because particularly if there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, they'll come in, oh, and then Dave said this, and you're like, no, we're not doing another change, are we? So say you have three revisions are included in this.
3.
Yeah,
Same here, 3 is my limit.
So to just put a cap on that and give you a tool for that.
Anton has a
I was just
think
curious,
about
because I don't know how it works here in the US generally, but who's generally generating the contract? Is it the client, or is it you, or is it basically
Good
you
question.
working together on that? Do they first produce it, then you insert the language you want, or how much control? Because it can really vary across different kinds of
It's
clients.
usually me,
Oh, yeah.
but if I work, I do work for Moon Travel Guides. They're a big company, so Moon has their own contract that I had to sign. But if it's me working for a smaller, just an independent person or a small publishing press, then yeah, I'm the one that sets the terms in those cases.
And it's, for the publishing companies that I've worked with, they set the contract. Roman Littlefield, they put in that contract, they don't need to pay you for 90 days. So,
Because I had a recent licensing contract experience, which was good, but they left a little bit. It was obviously their contract. It was a big publisher, but they left room for me to insert my own language. So one thing I'll mention, this could be bad advice, could be good advice, but I went to a lawyer for a contract review just to do my due diligence on this one. I then copy and pasted this contract into ChatGPT and asked it for its own review, and it gave me pretty much the same advice as the lawyer I paid $400 to. I'm not saying that it's worth having a look, because it depends what some ideas about, hey, like this particular, term limit is too long or whatever. So
a second pair of eyes, whether they're digital or not. So don't think you have to do everything yourself. So if you think I've got a contract, is it any good? Go Google it or send it to one of us and say, am I shooting myself in the foot with this? If you've got friends that do something, whether they're doing freelance or not, just a second pair of eyes, get someone else to review so that you've got some sanity.
And I did have a small business lawyer tell me one time that if it is written in the email, like if I say, I will make this map for you, 3 drafts, like this is when I bill you, this is when it's due, these are the deliverables, and they say, yes, go ahead and do it, that is as good as a contract, at least in Pennsylvania.
So keep your emails
Yes.
forever.
Yes.
And organize your emails into folders. I got on a call with a customer and they said, just so you know, the project manager, the PM, and our lawyer's in the room. And I'm going what's going on here? And they said, you've done this, this, and this, and you've done this. Well, they changed PM 3 times. I went back to my email folder 5 years back and proved I had done everything that was required in writing in the email. So I wasn't in trouble, but they never hired me again because I proved them wrong. They didn't like that. But you've got to cover yourself. So yeah, if it's documented, keep it forever.
And anytime I have a phone call, if they want me to give them a quote over the phone, I just say no, like we can talk generals now, but I am going to write to you. And any changes, we can of course have a chat on the phone, but also write to me. Like I need everything in writing.
Even a
so
text
that
message.
I can go back and
Screenshot it, save it, put it in a folder.
Yeah.
Can I?
Please.
Yes.
So I want to.
We got a question. We got a
for a
question. Oh, we got a question coming in.
Okay, because timing-wise, this panel session is supposed to go till 4:30, while all the other sessions are going till 5. So are people all right continuing on?
Stay till 5, vote.
Yeah.
If you want to leave, help yourself. Okay, we're good till 5.
Or leave if you need to. Yeah.
Stay.
Okay. I also have been receiving a bunch of questions here via Slack, so I do want to also connect to those a little bit. A couple of people have asked me at various points in Slack about business structures, LLCs, sole proprietorships, etc., and whether or not you have how you each operate and whether or not you would recommend that structure and why.
I think Daniel and I are going to disagree on this one based on previous conversations. I would completely recommend being an LLC.
And I second that.
Doesn't cost much to set up, and it does give you some protection.
Taking notes.
I'm, as I explained earlier, I'm also an S corporation, which is how I file my taxes, which means I have to file business taxes and personal. But it means my personal life is completely separate from my business. I cannot be sued personally. I also spend $5,000 a year on insurance. So that's part of my structure. But then I'm working with 911 systems, so I have to have $1 million policy for errors and omissions if I break a 911 system. If I hit you with my car, a rental car, it's $1 million. I've got to have a lot more. So we can talk about insurance, but as that relates to business structure, that's relevant because I have to be a business of a certain type to have that type of insurance. I have to have workers' comp. I have to have workers' comp for me in California, and I live in Alabama. But if that's required, you have to pay for it, otherwise I don't get that job. So I would highly recommend LLC. The base thing you should do is have a separate business bank account. Do not run business stuff through your personal bank account. It will cause you problems in the future. Even if you just go to the bank and say, how do I do this? And they may say, oh, you need an EIN. And now people are going, what's that? So you have a federal ID number. Now, if you buy a lot of stuff that you charge your customer for and they pay sales tax, you with an EIN can get all that stuff at wholesale.
EIN is Employee Identification Number with the federal government.
So I actually do payroll for myself and I pay all the social security taxes. So I'm set up as if I'm a massive entity.
And that's because of your S corp, though.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
not because you're an LLC.
Correct. So
Yes.
yeah, there's multiple layers. I'm the most complex.
Yeah, and I'm just an LLC. I'm not also an S corp.
And I'm a sole proprietor when I file my taxes, but I know, so I do a lot of work for Purple Lizard Maps, which some of you might know. It's, hiking maps that are on the East Coast. I know that Mike has an LLC because if someone is using his hiking map and gets lost and gets injured, that protects him from getting sued from someone. But I feel like with the work that I do, I can't even imagine how someone might sue me, but it might be something that I should look into.
We're in America.
Yeah.
That's how I look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also sole proprietorship. I have a DBA doing business as Upstate GIS, which is filed with my local county. But similar to Erin, my feeling is that the maps I'm doing, most of my mapping is for land trusts, it's for, planning documents, zoning maps, open space maps, farmland maps, things like that. Things that people aren't using for navigation, they're not using for things that are going to get themselves hurt, I would hope. In fact, every single map, almost every single map, I have a disclaimer on the bottom that says, this map is for planning purposes only. It is not for navigation or legal purposes. And so, for me, it's just been easier to do that. I do have a bank account for my, for the DBA. So I have that. I do have that separate. I do have liability insurance, that I pay, monthly. And most of my clients, because they're land trusts, they don't require a whole bunch of craziness. I have had things that sounded like a good project. It was through a municipality. They wanted, $5 million in errors and omissions and everything else, and I didn't go after that project because I just didn't want to have to deal with it. And there's a friend of mine that's a planner, and he does a lot of municipal work. And there was a local city that wanted to hire him. They needed all sorts of insurance. After he paid for all the insurance and everything else that he had to go through, he did get the job. And at the end, he basically made no money because the amount of insurance that he had to pay for outweighed the amount the city paid him. So, you may not be able to go after certain projects if you're not a corporation with, errors and omissions and everything else. But for me, that's okay. I'd rather do smaller projects, people that aren't, going to sue me.
Or going to pay you, because some entities require you to be a certain legal entity to write you a check.
Right.
So it depends, again, exactly on who your customer is.
Right.
It's a good question. Anton, do you have a follow-up to that?
I was just going to mention, another factor that often comes into what entity you choose is just, how much money you're making and what the best sort of really where the sweet spot is for tax as well. So, again, I know it's very complicated in the United States, not quite sure.
Sales tax, property tax, personal business tax, end user tax. Stuff you've never heard of.
When you're setting up entities and just making those decisions, advice from good accountants is extremely important.
Yep.
You'll be saving yourself a lot of money.
Yeah.
Good accountant. So, bad accounting story. I did my own taxes for a few years, filing all my stuff. I had underpaid myself estimated quarterly taxes. Underpaid the government. I had Obamacare, so I had tax credits. I earned more money that year. So, at the end of the year, my bill was $18,000. Because I messed up doing my own taxes. How much would have an accountant cost through the year? Less than that. So get an accountant early and be willing to pay people who are professionals that will save you.
And save you time.
Yeah.
That's now time you can use.
I just have to go into QuickBooks once a month and go, yeah, that's that, categorize it, and then ta-da, get accountants.
Andrew, you had a question.
It was around, following on from the talk about emails being contract. I don't have a written signed contract. I just go by emails, and so far so good. But how do you even get the knowledge of when to use a contract, what to put in it, what not to put in it, whether it's you creating it or whether it's a client that you need to ask them for it? How do you get that knowledge? How do you learn?
Well, there's two types of contracts. A one-page, very simple, here's just a signed document that says this is what the expectations are, this is the price, this is what you're getting. And then there's the 26-page one I had recently for public art piece. Their contract, I can't do any amendments. So someone will have a contract. I would say you should always have a contract. You can then choose whether to use it or not. But you can always refer to it and say, okay, these are the terms I'm agreeing to. And you can put those in an email. You don't have to be formal, but you need a base to start with. And I started with Google. What is a good contract for this type of work? And then amended it until I've got a single page. Because if I hand a customer a 26-page contract, probably not getting the job. But if I hand you a one page and go, oh, that's very clear, this is my expectation setting, sign it, move on.
I'll have to look it up later, but sorry.
I think we've sort of, a lot of this stuff sounds perhaps more, I know contracts especially, I think sound more complex than they really need to be. It's, lawyer, specialist, did it for years or whatever, but a contract is pretty much just you writing down with somebody else, hey, here's what I'm going to do, and then here's what you're going to do. Does that sound good? And, under certain circumstances, it might need to go into very arcane language, but on a day-to-day basis for a lot of what we do, the contract can just say, I understand that I'm supposed to make maps of Finland that have these things on them, and you will provide that, and I will be getting that information from you, and then we will do 2 rounds of revisions, and you will pay me this much by this time. And it doesn't have to have all kinds of, arcane descriptors in there to still be binding.
Yeah, that's basically what my contracts are. It's just
Yeah.
number of revisions, cost, due date, what am I going to give you?
Yeah.
That tends to work for what I do.
Yeah, and for me, anything that's like $1,000 or more, I'll have a contract. If it's less than that, it depends upon the client. I mean, emails, I think emails are fine. In 12 years, I've been burned once. It was someone who asked me to do something. It was going to be a few hours worth of work. I did it. He said, great, everything's great. So I was like, okay, great, here's your invoice. And I never heard from him again. Mm-hmm. So, it was like $300 I lost effectively. I threatened him with, small claims court and things like that. But the reality of it was that it would have been more time and effort than it was worth to try to chase him. But
yeah, I end up that way in small pieces as well. I usually don't have anything but the verbal email contract for those small ones. One piece of advice I received not long ago that ties into this idea of, the time and the expense, because the way the court system in the United States works, you can be right and you can win, but you still had to pay an absurd amount of money to be right and win.
Damn it, I'm right.
But you can specify in contracts that, that if you are right and you win, that the person also has to pay for your legal expenses. So that isn't necessarily, sure, maybe it cost you $2,000 to get $500 off this person, but if your contract also says they had to pay that $2,000, then that removes the impediment to you actually taking action against them. And that's something I only lately learned about as a clause you could potentially include to help with that.
You can bet that 26-page contract from someone else has that language in it and has arbitration language and who's the arbiter, etc. So,
yep.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And, from my own perspective too, I'm kind of in the middle of the chart. This is from the 2020 freelancer survey results. I think was the last time we asked about whether people were using contracts or not. And, it is kind of all over the place. As with a lot of the questions that we're answering here, each of us is doing things in a little bit of a different way. And I think that, many of us look at our colleagues then and say, yeah, I should probably get around to doing the LLC thing or having more contracts. So it's always good to see these in practice. But, for my own part, I am kind of sometimes on the lazy end of things. Speaking of what Rip was talking about a moment ago, though, about getting burned, there are some questions, too, that have come through on Slack about some of these kinds of situations. So how do you deal with non-paying clients? How do you deal with maybe also related to that scope creep, where somebody's saying, well, do this thing, and then suddenly they want something else that you didn't talk about previously. So how do you negotiate those kind of conversations and keeping them productive?
I'll start. I've never had a non-paying client, so I don't have any comment on that. But in terms of wording, just positive in terms of we've already gone through the 3 revisions and now you're wanting more. Try to anticipate that a little bit and use positive, strong words. So at 2 revisions, just to remind you, you've got only 1 more, and I will deliver the print and the map to you, and just be firm about it. Honestly, everything has worked out pretty well. So
saying no nicely.
Yes, but there's a trick to saying no in a positive.
Yep, make them think they made a good decision.
Yeah, I know you're making good decisions, but I bet you can put your all eggs in and finalize that tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll say one I do have the 3 drafts, and then let's say I'm working with an author for a book publisher, and the author is the one that's paying me. well, yeah, they have the 3 revisions, but then what happens then whenever they send the map to the publisher, and then the publisher then says, oh, by the way, can you amp up the grayscale for the ocean, and can you like increase the point size
That's a
from
great
6 to
example.
7? Well, then that becomes a 4th revision, and so in those cases, I do tell the author that there is a chance that the publisher is going to come back with another revision. So that is the case where I ask the author, please get the specifications from the publisher right away so I know up front what are they expecting. But a lot of times there's an author that doesn't know who's going to publish their book. They're submitting the manuscript, and with the manuscript submission, they need to have the finished map along with it. So those kind of get pretty awkward. But I've never had anything more than like it might take half an hour to adjust some colors. So and then with like clients that don't pay, I only had it happen one time. It was a kids triathlon, and that really felt awful because I know they used the map. Like it was in my town, and the woman just wasn't answering my email, and so in that case, I just thought, well, if she ever writes to me again, I'll just say absolutely not. So that that was a rough one. Luckily, it was just a couple $100, but like she just ignored everything I sent.
At that point, I've had $200 or $300 worth. It's not the money at that point. It's the fact that this person was a good acquaintance, and they just ignored you, and yet they took the thing.
Yeah.
And also, it's kind of like you text your friend and they don't respond. At some point, it's gone too far to ask again.
Yeah.
That's all in your own head. It's not too far, but it's like, I can't ask them now. It's been 3 months. So you have to be okay just writing some stuff off occasionally for your own sanity.
Yeah, and luckily it just happened that one time.
Yeah,
for
I'm
me,
like,
yeah.
I forgot about it until now, so thanks for drawing that. Ben, did you have a follow-up to what we're talking about?
No.
You can ask a different question. So.
Well, as far as offering up revisions, I straight up, I don't work until I just tell them I got a line, and it's first come, first served. Who pays first? You're commissioning my art. And as far as revision goes, it's like there's minor revisions, and there's like, damn, I got reboot.
Yeah.
So it's kind of how to gauge that.
Yeah, in that respect, I always have in the wording of my original communication that says, like, if it exceeds the scope of the original idea, if, it's pretty vague, basically, like, I have the right to say, okay, listen, you're asking way too much. You might have, they might have had one little revision for the first one little for the second. Oh, here's a bunch for the third, and then they realize, so in those cases I thought, okay, well maybe the first 2 could, count as one since they were so minor, and okay, fine, I'll do these. But then if, after that they say, okay, actually we want to zoom out of the map a little bit, we want to add 20 more locations. In that case I say, we're adding several $100 more onto this project now. I will not do any work. I will wait for them to agree to that. But oftentimes it's just me explain. It might be that they look at a map and, oh, look at all this blank space. I would love to fill that in with some more towns. So a lot of that is communicating from a geographer to an author that might not understand that you want to have a focus area on the map. You don't need to fill it in with extra information just because it's blank. So that a lot of times it's that I'll say, actually, you don't want to have these revisions. It's fine the way it is.
Sometimes you can push back.
Yeah.
You get really picky clients. They want to be involved in all of the process. So my way of mitigating that when I'm doing a hand-drawn map, there's a commission, it's their whole life story, is I do a first draft on a whiteboard. And I get their approval to put pen to paper, because once I start drawing, there are no revisions. I can't erase. Mm-hmm. So I do it the cheapest, simplest, here's a whiteboard, it's the right scale, the right size, are the right number of elements, does it feel right? And they go, oh no, you can change that. Rub it out, change it. Are you okay? So before they leave the room, they have given that first approval. Mm-hmm. So you can do that with digital stuff as well. You can do a quick and dirty sketch. Is this the right area? 3 to 5 minute sketch is what I'm talking about. So you want them, because this is a very visual medium, to look at it and go, yeah, that's what I was thinking. And then also straight away go, that's not at all what I was thinking. And that's happened
You're bringing up an, I think, important part of the process with the client, and that is the concept, the preliminaries. You know, do you submit that? And what I've had happen, and this is with actually subcontracting with the team that I subcontract with. We two of the three people that we're working with, the clients are very communicative and on top. We need to do this, and then someone who hasn't been paying attention comes in, and we've spent hours going through and developing the concept maps. And then someone comes in and says, oh, what about this and this? And all of a sudden the time starts evaporating for the project. And so you've just got to come down and no, we're at the point here where we don't have time for this. You need to communicate amongst yourself. And so you do have to be kind of firm sometimes.
And you can use Ben's cheat at that point. Like, if you don't give me revisions at this point, you drop out of the queue and someone else takes your spot.
Right.
And then you've basically told them there's a 4-month delay.
Yeah.
So put the pressure back on them to make the decision.
The concept stage is a really important part of the whole thing and getting it nailed down. You know, and this is a large map with a lot of trails, a lot of details, a lot of points. And anyway.
Interview your client, basically. Heather.
Yeah, I think this ties into something that David said a while ago too, this idea of, you know, we are educating our clients as we go. And so I think that also helps lead to a smoother revision process to make sure that they understand why it is the way it is. Because I think it would be surprising to a lot of clients, the parts that are hard to change on the map and the parts that are easy. You know, I've had clients come to me and say, well, you know, for this next revision, would it be okay if we took one of the dots off the map for one of the cities? Is that going to be too hard? And, you know, some of them will think that's a real fraught thing, and then they think nothing about, oh, also, can we, you know, pan over 10 miles and zoom out? And so they just don't, you know, they don't do this, so they don't understand, like, hey, this is hard, and this is easy, and so I'd usually try and communicate as we're going along, like, this preliminary part. All right, this is what the area we're going to look at, and it's going to be this size. Just so you know, this is going to be the hardest part to change later, so we want to lock this down first.
Don't be afraid to message, email, go talk to your client.
How do you guys handle getting data from the client? Like if they need to provide, do you have tricks to use? Do you have technologies that you use to get that from them?
So, I mean, for the tools, I usually use Dropbox, you know, shared folder or something that they can contribute data to. And the project doesn't really start until the data is there. So if they want the project on their timeline, then they need to get the data in.
What if they don't understand what data is?
So from them, we're usually just getting a GPX of trails because I'm doing a lot of recreational mapping. Or often if it's a land conservation group and they will have the parcel, the shapefile data. But if they don't know that, then that is a problem.
I do have I have to communicate a lot about how to do things. Like I work with a lot of older people that might be like retired professors that are writing a book in their 70s that might not know how to attach a file or download a zip, you know, so those that can be a little frustrating sometimes, but I think that, you know, first whenever I get a message from a client, I'll see like, well, you know, I'll kind of anticipate what the communication method might be. And a lot of them will send like scanned pieces of paper where they've written on it, you know, some people I will get, you know, shape files, GPX files, and so I just have to like approach each project completely differently based on who the client is, what they're capable of, and I'd say on average, like usually I'll ask them for a written list of locations that they want on the map, and that way we avoid any typos. I can just say this is the spelling that you use in your manuscript. You know, might be a historic book that the spelling of the town might be different in the way that they write, and so I'll want to match that in the map. And yeah,
the list of
totally
places
different.
to include from the client. If that's for maps for books, it's really
I'll just say like, what are the places that must be on the map? Like I can fill in contextual information like large water bodies, You know, like they don't have to say, put these 20 states on, like they can just say like, you know, put Montana in this corner, put Alabama in this corner, and you have to put these 10 places on, and then, yeah, I'll make the rest of it work. Is that what you were kind of asking, or?
Yeah, in the art world, make sure they type it. I've had handwritten lists. Like, is that an A or no? And that person's not responsive on email. So, well, guess is not the best place to be.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, most of my stuff, you know, the data that's needed is in the public realm for the maps I make. And then, yeah, so if there's specific properties that the client needs to be on the map, then, you know, I'll ask them for that. A lot of them have their stuff in CAD, which has various levels of usefulness in the GIS. You know, if the CAD file actually has geographic coordinates, yay. If it's local coordinates, no. But for me, you know, I'll usually, you know, they'll tell me what they need for the map. I'll see what I can get from, you know, government sources, any other sources, and then give them a list. Say, okay, you want a map that shows this. I can't get this, this, and this. Do you have it somewhere? Do you have, you know, one of your previous contractors, do they have it? Or, you know, do you have a picture of a map that you can send me that I can, you know, georeference and mark it up?
All right, well, we are starting to run down on time, so I want to divert us to one final topic to think about for a moment. This ties into some questions people have been asking in the Slack, but also one that I had on my list. So I had a list of questions just in case folks in the audience were not, you know, didn't know what to say, although I figured that was a pretty small probability. So, you know, in fact, we have way too many questions to answer, and I'm sorry that we won't be able to get to everybody's, but hopefully some of you can stay behind and chat. So the basic question is, you know, why did you get into the freelance life? Why did you choose this sort of style of making your living? And this ties into a question that one person, Heidi Paul, asked in the chat. How did you decide whether to do freelance and the pros and cons versus working for someone else?
I have a quick answer. I live in a very small town, and there are still no other cartographers but me. So if I wanted to follow this trade, I needed to create my own business. So that was and it was, you know, it's for me, being in that town is definitely a lifestyle choice, a preference to be there rather than moving to a city where I could get a 9-to-5 job. So I definitely had that as a priority.
Yeah, for me, I was, like I mentioned earlier, I worked for MapQuest, and at that time, AOL owned MapQuest, and every quarter we would have a different person come from AOL and be really excited about us, thinking that we made MapQuest.com, and we'd say, no, they're out in Denver. In Pennsylvania, we do publishing. You know, like there was just like, you could tell there was like this miscommunication between AOL and us cartographers. And I could just feel like things were going to fall apart soon. And so I quit. I moved up to State College, got that job at Penn State part-time, and, you know, was doing part-time freelance on the side just to protect myself. And then sure enough, like 6 months later, all of my friends in Lancaster got laid off. And they kept MapQuest.com at the time. I don't even know if people still work at MapQuest.
I don't know.
No, they do. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was that at that time there were a lot of companies that were folding, and I wanted to be a cartographer, and so I thought, well, I'm going to try to do this on my own, and luckily for me, it's worked out.
Twofold. One, I had aspirations of being a full-time artist, and so I set up the LLC way before. About 10 years before I actually became what I thought, and that was because I got laid off. And I got laid off, and I went to a bunch of networking and trying to meet people and basically replace the job I had with another one just like it, because that's what you're supposed to do. And somewhere in that process, I started projecting ahead 5 years and regretting my choices. So, projecting future regret of, I've got time to pursue. I'm going to be disappointed if I don't try this. So, what if I do this myself? What if I try contract? What if I make those old contacts? I ended up getting lucky, and I got contracted back by the people that didn't lay me off. I left a job previously. So some of it's just timing. But I had already set up the LLC. I'd already got the aspiration. I was already prepared for it. I just was scared to do this on my own. I'm the only breadwinner in my family. So my wife's a full-time artist as well. Well, not the only breadwinner. That's not fair at all. I'm the main breadwinner.
Yeah, and for me, it was mainly I wanted to do mapping, for all my job, not just a part of my job. And if you saw my talk 5 years ago, there was some strife, if you will, at the company I was at, change in ownership, which sort of was the catalyst for me making that decision. But I'd been thinking about it for many years before that, and I wanted to make maps primarily. I wanted to do spatial analysis primarily. I didn't want to be writing reports. I didn't want to be writing grants. And the other thing was family. Up until the point I went out on my own, my kids were in preschool, so they were getting dropped off at preschool by my wife on her way to work, and then my parents or her parents were picking them up, and it was a great system. But right around the time I was about to go out on my own, the oldest was about to start kindergarten, and now it's like, okay, well, someone has to be here to get them on the bus. Someone has to be here to get them off the bus. And so I was like, well, if I work at home, I could do that. So half of it was, just the allure of just doing mapping full time and not doing other stuff. And the other half was, personal family reasons, just logistics. It just made sense.
Yeah, I'll add on to what I said, just saying that I wanted to have control over the kinds of projects that I wanted to work on, because at MapQuest I was told this is what you're doing today, and now I do get to filter out and have that niche of what I really, really want to focus on.
Just say yes to everything.
Yeah.
Get it.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much for sharing all of your stories and thoughts. I will say, for those of you who freelance, or those of you who are interested in freelancing, there is a Slack channel on the NACIS Slack for people like us. So I'll just point out the community freelance channel there. So make sure to join that, because like David was talking about, this idea of you maybe writing a contract, you need a second set of eyes on it. Well, just tell everyone there and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? Or where did you get your insurance from? And I want some, and all these things. There are other freelancers there to help, and doesn't have to just be at this session. So with that, let's have a hand for all of our panelists.
And thank you, Daniel, for
Thank you, Daniel.
taking the time to do this.
Daniel.